Chapter 4 The Idris Hop. Brute, Thatcher, and Nori sat around the dining room table. "We have everything we need now except the secret ingredient," said Brute. "Which means we can start experimenting once the equipment gets delivered," said Thatcher. "Whenever that will be," said Brute. "Ankle Dork didn't say," said Nori. Brute chuckled. "In the meantime, we're going to town today. Thatcher, you keep keeping that barley alive." "It's germinating, Brute," Thatcher said earnestly. "We don't have a lot of time. Look, we'll go to town, track down Enkeldorf, get a firm answer on the equipment, and then hopefully the potion shop has our hop. If not, we'll get to brewing as soon as the equipment is here, with or without the Idris hop." "Okay," Thatcher said. "That works for me. I can try out this technique I've been toying with." "Ugh!" Brute suddenly screamed, slamming the table and completely cutting Thatcher off. "Not now, you stupid dog!" He nearly broke the table and bench as he stormed out the back through the kitchen. He walked past Soul Ripper leaning against the wall and instead grabbed Nori's mom's oboe, which was resting on top of a chest along the same wall where the broadsword stood. Nori and Thatcher quickly cleaned up the room. By the time they reached the back door to see what was happening, Brute was already sitting on the ground opposite the dog, playing the oboe. The hellhound listened, unmoving. Nori could swear that once the song played long enough, she saw the dog's flames begin to dance with the rhythm. Something about the big man on the little hill playing such a soft instrument to one of the loudest animals she had ever seen enchanted her. Her father, on the other hand, looked on with something closer to horror, almost a complete opposite of her expression. Nori wondered why he looked so concerned. Then she saw the fire reflected in his eyes and remembered the night the hellhound tore through the fields. Nori had a feeling that what her dad was seeing in his mind was far worse than just a couple of ruined crops. She looked at Brute and saw hope. Her father looked at Brute and saw doom. This didn't worry Nori. Look at that bastard. He was covered in scars. His hair didn't grow because of battle-forged magic. He was bound to cause trouble or bring it. Nori welcomed chaos. She was still young. Thatcher, on the other hand, knew the value of avoiding trouble. Brute played every song he knew for the hellhound. It was 3 songs. A solid 3 songs, on the oboe, which he could barely fit in his fat fingers on. He was proud of that. The hellhound of Holdoon must have been too, because when Brute got up, the pup did 3 quick whirl-arounds in excitement, starting his flames back up on high. Nori blinked her eyes. Did she just see that right? Was Brute training that thing? He came back inside, placed the oboe down on the chest, and sat on the bench at the table with a pitcher of lemon water. He downed it like he had just finished another day's work. Thatcher and Nori exchanged glances. Nori crossed her arms. "Hey, Brute, you can't just do that every time, you know," she said. "Do what?" he asked, genuinely perplexed. "Trash the house every time the dog shows up." Brute looked around. Everything was fixed. Everything was already fixed. "Okay, fine, but you can't just lose your shit anytime you want because everyone's afraid of the big guy." Brute sat there thoughtful. It helped that he was sitting down for this. Nori couldn't bring herself to admonish someone while she looked up at them. That was just awkward. Finally, Brute faced both of them. "I'm sorry." They both almost fell back. "I fly off the handle and it's not all right to anyone around me. I don't know why I do it." "Well," Nori said in a lighter tone, "what are you angry about?" "I'm filled with anger," Brute said, looking across the table at no one while holding the mostly finished lemon water. "Anger about everything. Layers of anger. A lifetime of it. How can I sort out a normal life after so much hate?" He sounded deflated. Nori had never seen him so small. Suddenly her dad was across the table, his hand on Brute's back. "It's okay, son," he said, patting him reassuringly. "Cutler has always been a safe haven for those who want to start over. You gave us that chance with the farm. It's only fair you get one too." I gave up on myself a long time ago, but I won't give up on Carmody or his dream. Brute put the pitcher down and stood up. So what do you say we go find that Idris Hop? He asked Nori. Nori nodded her head and pointed her finger at him, already heading off to get ready. Not too long after, she was following him out the door. She knew there would be another temper tantrum in their future, but it felt different now. She had some background on it, some context to make it make sense. He wasn't just being an asshole for no reason. He was being an asshole for so many reasons he couldn't keep track of any of them. Somehow that made her feel better, at least for now. Regardless, it was clear to all three of them, or it felt that way, that he needed to work on his temper. That was clear, right? Nori hoped that was clear. After turning onto posting, they soon hit the outskirts of town. A little while longer, and they were in the downtown area. Cutler wasn't very big, and for a man as loud as Engeldorf, it was hard to go unnoticed. They found him at the saloon, playing flats for some serious coin. Brute saw some of the king's gold on the table, catching the sunlight through the dirty window. Just the man we were looking for, Nori spoke for them. How can I help you two humble farmers, if I've ever seen a pair? Engeldorf grinned. You can tell us when we're getting the brewing equipment. Yes, that, he said, going back to looking at his cards and sliding coins to the center of the table. Raise. Engeldorf, Brute called the townie's attention back to them. We said 2 days, and that was yesterday. Right, he said, borderline dismissively. These kind of things take time. We don't have time. The barley has been harvested. We can't wait any longer. Well, then it sounds like you should have gotten the gear set up before the harvest. That's just poor planning on your part. He was right. The annoying little punk made great points that they had neglected to realize in time. Now they were scrambling. They had no choice but to wait for his gear. There's no one else in town who'll be able to sell you everything you need altogether. We need it as soon as possible, Brute said, as stern as he could. Intimidation isn't going to work on me, big guy, said Engeldorf. How about this? I'll pay you triple if you deliver it tonight, and double if you deliver it tomorrow. Engeldorf perked up at that. You have yourself a deal, Farmer Brute. They shook hands, and as Brute and Nori walked off out of the saloon, they heard Engeldorf say behind them, That's the grand line. I'll take those coins. Brute was finding his way through alternative methods of persuasion. He couldn't solve everything by punching it. He had learned that the hard way. The day his life changed forever. The day he never lets himself think about. He had a good feeling about Engeldorf. Not that he was a reliable guy, but that he could be incentivized by money. Wave enough gold in his face and he'd do just about anything for you, or say anything. Something about that kind of principle worried Nori. You can't trust a guy whose allegiance is to the highest bidder. She was intrigued by Brute's random bouts of obliviousness. It was almost as if his hide was so thick he didn't bother to worry about things that couldn't hurt him. Sure, Engeldorf couldn't stab Brute in the back, but he was smart enough to figure out other ways to hurt him. And he was definitely smart enough to realize Brute was spending money like a rich man. Nori made a mental note to keep an eye on Pill Engeldorf, the town sleazeball. You want to stop by the sandwich shop for a bite to eat? Asked Brute. Nori smiled at him knowingly. I'm not hungry. I feel like we just had breakfast, but if you insist. Brute started walking to his favorite place in town to eat. Nori continued. We can stop there on our way to the potion shop. Brute almost tripped in his stride. Nori caught it ever so briefly and treasured the reaction. She wouldn't say it out loud, not wanting to embarrass the guy, but she could tell he was nervous. Brutus Torniture, champion warrior of Ravinia, scourge of the underworld, intimidated by the very thought of talking to a girl. Men were fascinating creatures. Nori loved the sandwich shop. They baked the best bread, then sliced and toasted it, filling the inside with different combinations of meats and vegetables. Quick, cheap, delicious, and perfect for on-the-go dining. By the time they finished their walking lunches, they were just about at the potion shop, which was in the Underrealm district of town. Not all Underrealm-owned stores were located there, but a majority of them were. The sisters were proud Underrealm shop owners. They welcomed Underrealmers and Overworlders alike. No discrimination allowed inside. That wasn't just implied. There was a sign on the door that said so. Black letters that looked like they were carved and then burnt into wood. Nori, on the final stretch to the front door of the potion shop, decided she would walk in first and take the lead until Brute was ready and comfortable enough to get out of his own head. She hoped he would join the conversation so she could work her way out, but the big baby was just too damn shy. Plus, Nori kind of had a thing for outsiders. Not Underrealmers per se, but just general outliers. The Witch Sisters fit the bill. Upon crossing the threshold of the shop, Brute was immediately hit with the smells of cloves and incense. There were other hints in the air, sweet and sour, making it an all-out assault on his sense of smell. Nori didn't seem to mind. She had been here many times before. Walking through the aisles, Brute began to understand the reason for the smells. The incense was deployed to mask the rotten and earthy odors of all the wild things they had on the shelves. Not just rabbit's feet and eye of newt, but several shrunken heads and, disturbingly, eye of person. There was a skull of a beast mounted on the wall above the counter that looked like the biggest wolf he'd ever seen, with the sharpest fangs. Even the eye sockets of the skulls looked menacing. All three witches stood behind the counter. Well, one was sitting on a stool, but it looked super uncomfortable, so she might as well have been standing. When Azalea saw it was them, she perked up. "That's a good sign," Nori said to Brute. Azalea sprang into motion before they even made it to the counter. They waited a couple of minutes, and she returned holding a book. Nori felt a little let down, and Brute looked confused. "Hi, Nori. Hi, Brute. Hi, Brute said. "Hi," Azalea repeated. They exchanged an awkward look. Brute fought the urge to salute for some reason, and instead went with a gentle nod. She looked a little creeped out by the nod. Maybe he shouldn't have done that. Too late now. Thankfully, she continued. "I found this arcane tome about magical plants. Specifically cultivated ones, not wild. It was a whole section on the Idris Hop. Guess where they were grown and harvested? Tanzabar on the Rift. Not that far from here," she smiled. "No." Azalea smiled more. Brute looked confused, which was rapidly becoming his default expression. "You went there already," guessed Nori. Azalea pulled a small wooden chest from behind the counter and presented it to them. She unlatched the lock and opened the box from the top. Inside was one massive hop. It looked like something between an artichoke and a pine cone. There was a certain symmetry to the little leaves on it, and its color scheme was so vibrant it looked otherworldly. The climbing perennial had a greenish-brown stem with violet veins that bled into the rest of the hop, making most of it a rich violet. At the end of each tiny leaf, the violet faded to red, and the tips curled to a brilliant white. Azalea explained it to them. "This is how it works. You have to foster a relationship with this plant in one of two ways. If you don't have time to get to know it, the long way is out. Basically, you have to connect with the hop enough to get it to turn that shade of red." She pointed to the red on the hop leaves. "Once it's fully red, you make the incantation with your sacrificial offering. If it's accepted, the entire hop will turn that shade of white." She pointed to the white tips. "You can brew any batch and as many batches of beer as you want with the Idris Hop, and it will have the same effect until its seal is broken. You'll know because the hop will revert back to its base violet form." "What's the second way?" asked Brute. "I already told you. You have to connect with it. Usually people have the time. Brute flinched a little. He thought twice about that. Nori helped him out. How do we bond with a dead plant? She asked. Azalea let out a soft laugh. Don't sound so skeptical, Nor. You strike me as the type of girl who talks to her plants. Only when no one's watching, jested Nori. The girls laughed while Brute stood silently contemplating the riddle at hand. He stepped forward and picked up the hop. Brute held it in his big, burly hands almost devoid of wrists, and spoke to it without making real eye contact. I'm only doing this to honor my dead friend's memory. There's not a day that goes by where I don't wake up and miss him. For a long time, Carmody was the only family I had. I was closer to him than I ever was with Jintara. His loss took the thrill out of life for me. Before I started on this quest to brew his beer, I was waking up in the morning only to wait to die. A distinct tone rang throughout the room. Nori noticed Azalea react to it as they all stood around Brute and the Idris Hop. She looked down and saw the hop glowing red in Brute's hands. What now? He asked them. Holy shit, you did it, Azalea said, absolutely shocked. Yeah, now what do I do? Asked Brute. Azalea rifled through the book. I didn't think it would be that easy. What did you say to it? I was just being upfront. Brute, Nori said, her voice laced with genuine compassion. I've never heard you talk like that before. It says here that there has to be a sacrifice, Azalea read aloud. You make a vow to the Idris Hop, promising to withhold from doing something you love, or something that comes naturally to you, something you rely on. If the sacrifice is true and large enough, the hop will turn white. Can you think of anything? Azalea asked Brute. That I love? No, not for a long time. He looked off, dwelling on the silence of his own words. Azalea felt sorry for the guy. So did Nori. Then again, Nori didn't really have anyone besides her father. She caught her gaze drifting towards Azalea's sisters. Do you have anything you rely on to make a living? Azalea asked. Not yet. I'm kind of blowing a small fortune on this brewery. Azalea tapped her chin. Take it home. Give it the night. Think about what comes naturally to you. Who you are at your core. Find yourself and isolate a piece of you with great significance, and find a way to sacrifice it. Easier said than done, Brute said. After what you just did to make it red, it really shouldn't be a problem, reasoned Azalea. I suppose you're right. If you want, I can come check on your progress. Brute perked up at that. He wasn't really in the business of hiding his emotions. That's a good idea. We can use all the help we can get. When were you thinking? We're on a short time frame with the barley germinating. How about tonight? Said Azalea. You can come over for dinner, added Nori. I was just going to pick up a roast and root vegetables for us tonight. That sounds agreeable. Do your sisters want to join? Asked Nori. They only drink the blood of virgins, said Azalea, with such a straight face that neither Brute nor Nori knew if she was joking. Finally, she started laughing. Brute and Nori followed suit nervously. How much do we owe you? Asked Brute. The Idris Hop cost me 10 gold coin in Tanzabar. We usually charge 60% interest. It only took Brute a couple of seconds to calculate the total amount and then add his tip. He took out his money pouch, reached in, and pulled his hand out, giving her 20 gold coins. All of a sudden, they were no longer getting dirty looks from Azalea's sisters, hovering at the other end of the counter. Wow, said Azalea. You are too kind, mister. It's Brute. Brutus Tornager. Like the champion of Ravinia? She asked. The very same. That's it, then. Do you still have your legendary broadsword? I left Soul Ripper back at the farm. Perfect. I have a great idea. I'll meet you at your farm a little later, and we'll perform the incantation before dinner. That sounds great, said Nori, and I think I know where you're going with this. When we get home, I'll build a mantle over the fireplace that's sturdy enough to hold that monstrosity of a broadsword. Brute looked back and forth at them in pure consternation. It took him the majority of the walk home to catch up to their plans. She means to bind the Hop with me hanging up my sword. I think so, yeah, said Nori. Not sure why she couldn't just say it outright. She seems to have a flair for the dramatic. Maybe it's a witch thing. Or it could just be a female thing, said Nori. You're not like that. First of all, I can be, with certain things I hold dear. And second, not all women are the same. Of course not. I apologize. Don't worry about it, you big lug, Nori said, knocking elbows with him. I think that went really well. This roast is going to make a great dinner and keep me busy so you two can get better acquainted. You're relentless, Nori, smiled Brute. Ah, there it is, Nori cheered. I am excited that she's coming over for dinner. This is turning out to be another great day. If we string too many of these along, it might trigger the other foot. What other foot? It's just something my sister used to say. We are well on our way to brewing the best beer this side of the rift. First, we actually have to brew the beer, said Brute, ever the realist. Later in the evening, Azalea arrived at the Hargrove farm right as Nori started to prepare dinner. Brute brought Azalea out to the barn, where they had set up a place to experiment with the yeast, barley, and hops. The barn looked like an unfinished house. Thatcher had been in the middle of renovating it when tragedy struck his family and never let up. He had installed the fireplace and sealed off most of the barn, except for the far wall. Brute led her over to the Idris Hop, sitting in the wooden chest. Next to it was Soul Ripper, resting against the wall beside the fireplace, now brandishing a mantle Nori had installed earlier. He was showing the Hop his blade, doing exactly what she had told him back at the shop, connecting to it. This guy was unreal. I've been telling Idris about my greatest achievements with Soul Ripper, including the day I inherited the ancient blade. I would very much like to hear that tale, if you wouldn't mind telling it again. Not at all. This time I'll do a better job, now that I've just been through it. Azalea got herself comfortable as she could on one of the stools by the table. Brute began his tale. This was back when I was a regular-sized man with a regular-sized sword. I was just starting to make a name for myself on the battlefield. Me and my sister always had a rivalry that propelled us into excellence during our training. It was a healthy rivalry until it wasn't. The king's army was trying to take back Lucranic on the sea, the easternmost city in the rift. My sister Gintara was already promoted to the King's Guard at this point. I was Vanguard Infantry. King Coldheart's infantry were not completely without hope. He had a whole arcane unit dispatched to watch our backs. That's where I would eventually meet Carmody, but not this day. The fight outside the city lasted days. Then we overtook the city. Then we sacked it. As the army strategically took control of Lucranic, piece by piece, there were still pockets of resistance that could devastate an entire regiment. We had to be careful and mindful, which meant we had to move slow. I found myself deep into a district corridor. The buildings looked ancient. The vanguard was split up by the congested architecture. When the Lucranicians attacked, I was separated from the rest of my comrades. Back then, I used to get scared. This was one of the most terrifying days of my life. Even when I was normal size, being discreet was never my thing. I'm no assassin or spy. I killed the two enemies that followed me away from the fight. As soon as I thought I was in the clear, more found me. 2-on-1 I could handle, but a 4-on-1 right after a 2-on-1 took everything I had. I dropped all 4 of them, but at the cost of my left leg. One of them got a sword stroke in on my blind spot and practically cleaved his blade clean through my thigh. I bashed his brains in before he could dislodge the sword or break through the bone. When they found me again, I thought I was going to die. They kept coming out of the ruin like rats. Every time I thought it was going to be reinforcements, it was more of the Lucrenic army. They knew they were losing their city, so those in close proximity would settle for taking my head in recompense. I wasn't going to let that happen, but I had to fight defensively with the bum leg. The hardest part was not showing my injury. They made me lunge for a block, and I nearly tripped. It immediately alerted them that something was off, and then like vultures or piranhas, they went for my left leg, right where the sword wound was. Lucrenicians were now generations of Underwhelmers and Underwhelmers mixed. Once they smelled blood in the air, there'd be no getting rid of them. I would have to find a way to put them down permanently without a functional left leg. When you get brought down to the grit like that, it's all about what you're willing to sacrifice for an exchange. Suddenly a hum emanated from the Idris Hop. Azalea heard it clearly, but Brute didn't seem to notice. He kept talking as if nothing had happened. What can you afford to lose to get in a killing stroke? What can you give up to save your life? The hum was interrupted by a tone in the next register up, sounding off. Azalea stirred. Brute still didn't notice all the noises. He was really focused on telling this tale. To kill those guys, I gave up my sword. To escape another pursuer, I gave up my ability to walk when he slashed my right leg, while I brought my sword down on his head. I crawled into the nearest building to avoid being seen. It was Invernium. They followed my trail of blood into the Palace of Wonders. I hid behind a gravestone. It was too dark to make out much detail. There were 3 Lucrenicians in the Invernium, and still no sign of reinforcements from King Coldheart's army. What I would have given for some Arcanist support. Instead, I fought for my life tooth and nail. The first one found me, and I bashed his head into that tombstone until all I was holding was hair. Except it wasn't a tombstone. It never was. It was Soul Ripper plunged into the ground. Brute paused to add suspense. Blood magic is brutal but efficient. That one exchange led to a permanent bond between me and the sword. You see, in the skirmish, my blood and the Lucrenician's blood both got on the broadsword. The intensity of the deposit of the Lucrenician's blood overrode the sacrifice and bonded my blood to the sword. In doing so, it created this symbiotic relationship. As long as I kept feeding the sword blood and brain matter, I would continue to be able to wield it. Although that might have been true for some time back then, later on in my life I found a way to avoid the cost. In other words, I became so juiced on magic that I could lift the sword without having to pay the blood toll. I was finally free from Soul Ripper's curse, but I didn't want to starve it. So I would always let the sword consume whatever scraps it could get from my fights. When they found me and the mess around me, they really couldn't believe their eyes. King Coldheart was called to the scene himself, where my sister confirmed my identity. His arcane healers patched me up, and when I was back on my feet, I pulled Soul Ripper out of the ground. I had no business holding a sword twice my size, but I did so with ease. When I tried to hand it off to someone, it sank like a stone in the ocean. The broadsword had bonded to me. That's what caught the king's attention. Not even a year later, Carmody and I were called up to the king's court, which was about as close as you could get to the king without being one of his guards. My sister had a run-in with one of the young princesses and got demoted back down to the court with us. So essentially, Soul Ripper not only saved my life, but it led to the trio that would make me famous across the land. That was quite a story, said Azalea, now in analysis mode. Sounds like a lot of who you are is tied to Soul Ripper. Yes, I would say so. Have you wondered who Brute is without the sword? She asked. That's all I've been trying to figure out since I quit the army. Wow, you quit? They just let you do that? She pressed. Would you try to stop someone who looked like me? He retorted. I suppose not. Running into you probably feels like running into a brick wall. She backhand slapped his chest playfully, and they both laughed. But just for a second, her hand lingered on his chest, as if she had been waiting for an excuse to touch him and now wanted to savor every last second. The moment passed too quickly for him to make anything of it. That being said, he wouldn't forget the quiet pause anytime soon. Trying not to fight when you have a big sack of coin cushioning your every move sounds like easy street to me. I'm not saying you didn't deserve the spoils of your war, I'm just pointing out the obvious. What's obvious? Asked Brute. It's not really a sacrifice if you don't rely on it to live. Is that what you think? Brute asked, his voice suddenly taking on a new tone, one that oozed wisdom. I assume you're going to tell me otherwise, Azalea said, raising an eyebrow. We do not live in a world devoid of wrath and ruin. This is Grishambark. Trouble is always near, especially on the Rift. A day will come when I have to pick up that godforsaken sword again, and when that day gets here, you better pray to Sister Solstice or whoever witches believe in to deliver you from death if I'm not wielding Soul Ripper. I can take care of myself, said Azalea. I'm sure you can, and I'm not just saying that. You're a woman I would not want to cross. Well, I hope that isn't entirely true, she said playfully. If Root could blush, he would have in that moment. I can't thank you enough for obtaining this Idris Hop so quickly. Trust that we will come to you first for all future endeavors that require your wares. A couple of big words always did the trick for him when trying to hide his infatuations. The Idris Hop was the easy part, said Azalea. The hard part is the incantation. Your friend Carmody knew this. That's why he thought it was such a good idea. This is a master-level incantation, something they only teach at the Arcane Academy. It's not like any half-wit magic user can pull this off. Name your price, said Brute. Without skipping a beat, Azalea replied, Take me out to dinner. You're talking about a date? Asked Brute. Well, if I waited for you to ask, it could take years. I accept, he said. Great, Azalea smiled. You can take me to Obelisk, the latest fine dining spot downtown. Okay. And, Azalea clipped her words carefully, do you own any shirts? Yes, I own plenty of shirts. Hey, don't think I'm complaining, bub, Azalea said, knocking his elbows with hers. They just get in the way. They're always too tight in certain places and make me hot. Sounds like you need a personal tailor. My skin is like leather. What I always need is a nice cool breeze. Interesting, Azalea said, her eyes drifting as if a thought had caught her off guard. She gave herself a bit of space from Brute and the Idris Hop on the table, then began waving her arms. The motions were precise, succinct lateral and vertical waves. It was the beginning of an incantation, though not the one for the hop, Brute suspected. She continued the movements, adding intricate hand signals to each wave. Finally, she spoke in a different tongue. Hagaman tan terig tono verboso bernotono rosso sondia. 3 more waves with her left arm, hand gestures as if pulling wind from the air, and the incantation was complete. A gust formed between her palms, coalescing into a visible breeze. It surged toward Brute and broke apart against him like a translucent wave crashing into rock. The smaller currents spiraled outward, spreading across his abdomen and rushing up his back, then down into his limbs. They didn't dissipate. Instead, they divided into smaller flows, forming a full-body wind system. 6 major currents enveloped him: head, body, left arm, left leg, right leg, each forming its own little breeze. They were so fine and subtle, it didn't interfere when he moved. It was like he had his own personal orbit. In short, it felt amazing. What? Brute struggled to form a coherent thought as he enjoyed the full body breeze. What did you say to create this treasure? I said, Wind spirits of Cutler, give our friend here the relief he seeks. That's it? It's a simple incantation, she laughed. I didn't even have to put down a glyph circle. Karm was always trying to come up with ways to make the glyphs in the air. How would he do that? Asked Azalea. The closest he ever came was cutting a glyph circle out of paper and then burning it. But we always used to try with the smoke from his pipe. He sounds like a fun arcanist. He was the best, ahead of his time, and a good man. How did he survive the fall of the arcane, if you don't mind me asking? Not at all. I love telling people about Karm. It makes me feel like he's still with us. Azalea smiled, the inner tips of her eyebrows arching upward. Carmody Voltunis was one of the most gifted arcanists to ever go through the academy, and for that he was almost expelled. They didn't just let him graduate the academy as a master arcanist, they hired him to teach there. Over time, he ended up giving the administration just as much trouble as an instructor as he did as a student. Carmody refused to listen to doctrine. He renounced the dogmatic ways of the arcane and constantly sought out new, innovative ways to wield Christian Bark's magic. The magic on the surface is but the tip of the iceberg, remarked Azalea. He knew that as well. You two would have gotten along well. Is that the end of the story? How does he go from instructor to paladin? It's the same answer for most. The war. The Battle of Havadanya, to be exact. He fought for the lives of his students and their families that day. Fought and lost. The day the academy fell was the day the arcane lost the war. Carmody survived and never stopped fighting. Never stopped avenging Havadanya until his last breath. But he did have a plan for after the war was won. The brewery and the Idris beer. That's right. I'm sorry for what happened to him, and to you, and your people, because of the war with my people. There's nothing to be sorry for, Azalea. I'm no political historian, but I don't think you're responsible for our two races being at war with each other for the last 4 millennia. Plus, I figured there has to be a reason why you and your sisters moved out to the Rift in the first place. Not bad, Brute, Azalea said proudly. It's true. There are many things my sisters and I don't agree with under Ralmon, and for that reason we live here in Cutler, as far away from the Covendinium as possible. Part of why we had to cut ties with our people is because of the war. But it is complicated. For example, we live on the very land that we protest the Covendinium to give back to Overworld. If they give it back to your people, would we then be forced to leave? We know what our leaders are doing is wrong, but the road to reconstruction is not clear. King Cohart was always a just and kind leader, but that's not true about the rest of Overworld's sovereigns. They war with each other while they let poor Cohart fight for the border between worlds. It is truly shameful. I had no idea humans could be so petty. It sounds just like the Covendinium. We are not so different, if only the people of both realms could see that. This fight cannot be won with logic and reason, but only blood and steel. I learned that a long time ago. Azalea admired Brute for a second. What? I just never thought I would find such depth in a fist of Overworld. It comes with years of surviving being pounded against the unstoppable force that is Underrealm. They both peered fondly at each other. The third silence of the evening was an adoring one. Azalea and Brute kept getting to know each other before the Idris Hop. It seemed to be working. They were forming some sort of four-way connection. Azalea, Brute, Soul Ripper, and the Idris Hop. Brute helped Azalea draw the glyph circle on the floor of the barn with ashes from the fireplace. They centered it in front of the mantle so Brute could be standing in the middle of the circle when he placed Soul Ripper on the mantle. By the time they finished prepping everything for the incantation, Nori arrived at the barn to announce that dinner was ready. Thatcher was setting the dinner table when they walked into the house. Azalea immediately went to help him. Nori walked past them both toward the kitchen and glanced back at Brute, smiling approvingly. The meal was delicious. Nori had bought doe trip legs at the butcher in town. Doe trip legs were the most tender of all the poultry meats. She whipped up some cream into root vegetables like potato and squash, fluffing them and then sprinkling in chopped bacon before pouring the mix into 4 hollowed-out loaves of sourdough bread. These were then covered in shredded Gernesca cheese and toasted in the oven. The legs were served crossed on top of the sourdough bread bowl with a raspberry and herb reduction drizzled over the whole dish. Azalea stared at the marvel plated before her. Everyone else started cutting into the legs and tearing off toast points from the loaf to dip into the root vegetable puree. Nori tried not to smile as she watched Azalea appreciate her hard work. Not only that, but this was the best showing of table manners that Brute had ever exhibited since moving in. No doubt a side effect of Azalea's presence. It occurred to Nori just then that Brute had probably dined in the great halls of kings and conquerors across the countryside. It wasn't that big of a deal, except for the fact that this meant the guy chose to eat like a complete scoundrel in front of them. She tried her best not to give him a hard time about that. "So you guys set up the big incantation?" she asked. Brute and Azalea looked at each other and then nodded at Nori. "We think so, yeah. Nothing left to do but try it after dinner." "How exciting!" Nori exclaimed. "We've certainly come a long way," said Thatcher. Azalea could feel the spirit in the room, and it thrummed to her. This funky family had a genuine earnestness to them. She wanted to help them, not just because she had a thing for Brute, but because they made her feel like part of the family. That was it. She felt more at home here than with her own sisters, after one night spent in their company. Azalea looked at her drink to see if it was laced with anything, or overly alcoholic. It was lemon water. What she was feeling wasn't artificial, as much as she wanted it to be. The rest of the meal passed with little conversation. They were all enjoying the food too much. Brute devoured both his legs before even starting on the bread bowl. Nori saw that coming from a mile away and had 2 more legs waiting for him. Well, she actually had 6 more legs ready to give him, but the glutton didn't need to know that. If she saw him looking around for more meat, she would go get reinforcements. After the second round of legs, he was taken by the bread bowl and started tearing into it. The gooey cheese is what caught his attention. Once he saw Thatcher and Azalea struggling with theirs, he basically forgot about the doe trip legs. Nori also had a dessert prepared for them, but she was so excited about the Idris Hop incantation being ready that she decided not to reveal it until after the ritual was performed. She had it all figured out, and the plan was flawless. If the incantation worked, they'd have the surprise dessert to celebrate. If it didn't go well, then at least they'd have dessert for short-term satisfaction. Either way, they were covered. It just so happened that dessert worked for most plans. Azalea helped Thatcher with the dishes. In the Hargrove house, the cook never cleaned up, and the few times Brute tried to wash dishes, he broke 1 out of every 3. They accepted his lack of help in this area graciously. In no time, they were walking back to the barn, ready for the main event of the night. Even Thatcher joined them. Before they reached the door, they heard something break and rushed in to find the Idris Hop had quadrupled in size. It had burst out of its wooden box, stretching towards the sword. "Look!" Azalea called out. "It's gone completely red!" As they got closer, they saw not only had the hop turned from violet to red, but now white veins were streaking through it. Azalea knew exactly what this meant and got ready to perform the ritual. "Now, Brute, although I am the one controlling the incantation, you are the one who will be bonding to the hop," Azalea explained as she led Brute to the center of the glyph circle, careful not to scuff the lines drawn in ash. "Think of me and the incantation merely as conduits. What I'm trying to say is, you will have to speak when prompted." "What do I say?" asked Brute. "Just pay attention, and you'll know when the time comes." "That's not very helpful." "Okay, here we go. Look alive, people." Azalea swiped a line of ash clear that had been obstructing the circle and rubbed the residue between her fingers. Wiping away that single obstruction seemed to activate the circle. She then marked her own face, drawing a line from her forehead over her right eye and down her cheek. She smacked her hands together abruptly, and a few things happened all at once. First, all the ash being used in the ritual began glowing a pure white, including what was on Azalea's fingers and the line on her face. Then, a stream of the same glowing white connected the line on Azalea's cheek to her fingertips in the shape of a triangle. Carnosa Tarnica Deslovo, Carnoska Rictarnovo, Azalea said in her native tongue. The glyph circle, once ash and now glowing light, streamed upward wildly toward Brute like a ghost flame. Azalea's words caused her triangle stream of light to pulse and push toward the glyph circle. It held its triangular form, but dissipated just before making contact. "Hold on," said Azalea, her voice strained. She held her right hand out, palm vertical and flat. After a moment, she slowly pulled her hand back toward her, and the triangle stream of white light began to retreat at the same pace. She reeled it in and closed her eyes. Azalea began to glow from within, but this time it was a completely different color. Instead of clean white, it was a fiery yellow. Her form blurred at the edges. For a brief moment, they saw a negative image of her. Her skin took on a vibrant shade of violet. Her eyes went dark where the whites should have been, and her irises blazed with the same fiery yellow. As quickly as it appeared, the form vanished. Azalea took a deep breath, and using the pointer and middle finger of each hand, twirled the stream of white light together in front of her. She crushed it into her palms, and then released a bolt of lightning from those same four fingers. The bolt thrashed about wildly, and, on one of its bends, connected with the glyph circle. The magic surged. It zapped the glowing flames simmering around Brute, blasting them upward. The flames climbed over his head, wrapped together above him, and then draped down over his body like a shimmering veil. Brute was now surrounded in pure white light. The glowing light faded back to ash. The only remaining white was a single flame emanating from Brute's heart. "Pick up the sword," directed Azalea. As soon as Brute grabbed Soul Ripper, the white flame split in two. His body twitched during the divide. One flame moved down to his hand and then into the broadsword, while the other remained over his heart. When he hung Soul Ripper on the mantle, the two small flames exploded. Once everyone regained their sight, they saw Brute and Soul Ripper glowing. "Now, Brute," said Azalea, "speak the words." Brute fought the urge to say, "What?" Instead, he focused and thought about his path so far. From his time with the Idris Hop to how far he had come since leaving the fight, he had traveled a long road in search for a new way of life. But when it all came down to it, had he really changed? Could he? Or would he always try to solve his problems with his fists? The time to make a choice had come. He had to decide what he wanted out of the life he still had. "I'm hanging you up, Soul Ripper," he said. "With this act, I vow to stop solving my problems with violence and to choose the higher path in all coming conflicts. I, Brutish Tornature, the hero of Valen Fields, the Purge of Holdoon, Ravinia's Tribunal Champion, Captain of King Colhart's Court, Bane of Underrealm, and wielder of the blade known as Grishambark Soul Ripper, relinquish my right to the Eternal Blade, and vow a path of non-violence henceforth." "It's working," said Azalea, drawing everyone's attention to the Idris Hop turning white. "There's only one thing left to do." Brute stood there, his hand still gripping the hilt of their giant broadsword, now resting on the mantle. He could have let it go a while ago, but he hadn't, so they still glowed. All he had to do was release the sword. He had done it 100,000 times before. Why was this time any different? It was mostly symbolic. He could pick up the sword anytime he wanted to, or more importantly, anytime he needed to, and yet, so much was riding on this moment. If he truly wanted to change his life, it started here. "I release you," said Brute, as he slowly unwrapped his fingers from Soul Ripper's hilt. As soon as he let go of the sword, they stopped glowing, and a deep, resonant tone rang out. The ritual was complete. The circle returned to ash, and the Idris Hop pulsed with pure white light on the table. "It worked," Azalea said, her voice filled with pride.